Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning into the Owl's Nest. Today, Jake and I are going to go over 3 of the biggest blowout matches from Week 2 of the Overwatch League Summer Showdown. Welcome back to our regular listeners and to any new viewers. If this is your first time here with us on the Owl's Nest, make sure you hit that subscribe button and like the video. Of course, I'm joined, as always, by the one and only Jake Lyon. Jake, how's it going, man?
Doing good. Happy to be here. I'm looking forward to getting into this week's topics. I think we had a pretty crazy week in the Overwatch League, it's fair to say.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what I actually liked really the most about these past few weeks is a lot of times we'll see a lot of blowouts, a lot of 3-0 sweeps, and maybe a few 3-1s, but not a lot of map 5s. This past week was a little bit different, and I think because of that, the blowouts really kind of stood out to me. And we're actually going to go over 3 of what we thought were the biggest blowouts from week 2 of the Summer Showdown. And we're actually going to start with one that might seem like a little bit of a gimme, but that's going to be the San Francisco Shock versus the Washington Justice. And I think the first thing that I have to ask Jake is, what was Super doing on map 1? I mean, obviously, he's a great player. He can play just about anything that he puts his mind to, but when was the last time we saw him take out the Wrecking Ball?
Yeah, I think they wanted to try something new on Nepal. They wanted to shake it up and just approach the game in a different way or something. But I just think it didn't work really at all for them. Like the idea of some of those picks is sort of high risk, high reward. So in a sense, you can't entirely look at the result, right? Because a couple boops off the map on Wrecking Ball, and a bad game turns into a great game. It's not all about outputting damage or whatever. It's there's the value you provide to the team is more in terms of like making the enemy scared of certain positions, make them fear to make the rotations and whatnot. But I think Justice just proved that they're not a team that you can get too creative with. Like if you want to beat them, you need to beat them on fundamentals, on your core abilities. And I do think that for the Shock's benefit, they've got players like Striker and Ons just going off, having completely crazy games. But yeah, Super playing these weird heroes, it's like he's not bad at them, but it just goes to show how insanely good a player like Choi Ho-bin really is, right? Like the actual amount of value this guy provides. Like Super might be fine at Sigma, but Choi Ho-bin is one of the very best in the league, and especially a hero like Sigma, in this current meta, that's so incredibly impactful. So if anything, this is the one I wanted to start with as far as stomps, because this was less of a stomp than it might have otherwise been, right? Like you could argue that's maybe Shock not playing to their full maximum potential, trying to get experimental, which I think is actually not too crazy to do when you're on top. You want to continue innovating rather than just rely on what's already worked for you. It's not going to progress you forward as a team. It's just going to, you're going to keep doing what you're doing, and if you're winning, you probably won't change. So it's good for them to still be experimenting, but the fact that they can just sort of come back to basics whenever there's an issue, and they have this incredibly strong basis to work with, that's a huge asset to them as a team. Now,
do you think that the Washington Justice kind of, again, because they showed a little bit of resistance there, they got some map or some capture progress on those first 2 points. Do you think that some of that might also have to do with some of the new players that they've been bringing in? The Justice is going through a lot of a pretty big roster shift right now.
Yeah, I think it's tough for a team that is so new in terms of the roster and fresh that they're going to be, obviously they're going to struggle to take on the best team in North America, which I think the Shock have sort of reclaimed that title from Philly, at least for now. Yeah. That's how it feels to me. They're the team I sort of predicted them to be champions at the beginning of the season. I'm feeling pretty good about my prediction. It's too soon to say, especially as far as going up against an APAC team, but I would be pretty surprised if they're not the team, if they're not one of the teams in grand finals, rather.
Now,
so they're just incredibly good, right?
Yeah, and you had mentioned that when you're a team like the Shock and you're going up against one of the lower ranked teams, let's be honest here, Washington fans, that it's okay to start experimenting a little bit. And that brings us into our number 2 blowout, which I don't think anybody saw coming. That was the Dallas Fuels being swept by the Vancouver Titans. This was not a good look for the Dallas Fuel, and they have since been raked over the coals on social media because Decay wasn't anywhere to be seen, instead bringing in Anigod, which Arrow has said that the idea here was, to give Decay a little bit of a break, let him rest a little bit, and again, when you're going up against lower-ranked teams, that's not a bad angle to take. But what do you think happened here? Was this really just Decay not being in the lineup, or do you think that the Titans, maybe found a little bit of themselves?
I do think the Titans definitely proved that they're not a team to be underestimated, right? That, this is sort of the same thing we saw a long time ago in the Overwatch League. Like, when a lot of the top teams put in their second string players, trying to give them play time, even against teams that were thought to be really, really weak, like Season 1 Dragons. I mean, they put Philly to map 5 multiple times in Season 1, and Philly always seemed to clutch it out. Obviously they did because 0-40 and everything, but Shanghai had impressive results against a lot of teams, just pushing them close, just never able to close it out. But proving that you can't, it's not so easy to put in your second string roster and still find success. Like, the level of competition of the Overwatch League, even the teams that are at the bottom are still extremely strong teams relative to anybody trying to play Overwatch as a team. Like, they're still extremely good. It's only the incredible strength of the top teams that makes them look weak and vulnerable. I think that's just an important lesson to be learned as far as putting in second string players. And I think Onigod is a great player. I think he has a lot of potential, but there's no denying that he is second string to a player like Decay. I don't even think that's a mark of shame for Onigod. I think there's not a whole lot of players in the entire league who I would want to start over Decay if I were a coach. I think I'd have Decay playing 100% of the games. If anything, though, I would have much rather seen Onigod starting with Decay, playing those two together rather than Doha. And no offense to Doha, but I just think this current meta, especially if you look at the APAC region and a lot of Western teams, they've been playing double hit scan. They've been playing Tracer Widow, Tracer Ashe. That comp seems really strong. Some teams have been playing it almost 24/7. So I'm just curious, more so than starting Onigod, why the Fuel were so they went very hard on this dive Tracer Genji style, which is just surprising to me. I think I don't actually put this on Onigod. I think I put this on a wider strategic vision from the team, because I still think the Orisa Sigma comp is so dominant. Dive can work, but it felt to me like they forced it in maps and situations where it's quite difficult to execute. And Vancouver just reaped the rewards. And then when it got back to feel oh crap, let's go back to playing Orisa Sigma, then Vancouver had momentum, and they are extremely strong players. KSA is consistently on the top of the leaderboards in NA, always in top 10. I always see him there, and that's no easy feat. Showing that he's really, really competent on the Sigma, which is so important for that comp, that your Sigma is particularly high skill, very much a carry hero. So I just felt with Shockwave popping off, with Dalton popping off, Dallas sort of tried to come back to basics, but they just weren't strong enough to take on, a reinvigorated Vancouver Titans.
Well, hopefully for the sake of the Titans fans, this is a turning point for them, and going forward, they can at least take a few more map wins than they've been doing in the past. So this brings us to our number 1 blowout of Week 2 of the Summer Showdown, and that is the San Francisco Shock versus the Paris Eternal. Now, this was a game that, look, no one's surprised that San Francisco won. But I think that everyone was a little bit disappointed that we didn't get as much of a match as we thought we were going to. The Shock, of course, with this win, have set or were the first to set the record, the first team to sweep every other team in the league. What was it here, Jake, that made San Francisco so absolutely dominant over the Paris Eternal?
It's a pretty impressive stat for Shock, but I think this was, for me at least, this was really an Ons and Striker show more than anything. Maybe Ons in particular in this match, because he just seemed to outclass XZ, which, if you look at the past performances of XZ, yes, he's been out a lot, so you kind of put this with a grain of salt. He hasn't been playing so many matches. He's maybe not on his 100% peak form right now. We don't know what whether his wrist injury still has latent issues. I'm sure that's prevented him from practicing as much as he'd like to practice. So definitely a little bit of a grain of salt, but you can only have so many excuses, right? Ons is just a freak of nature on the hit scan heroes, and Striker has, for my money, been the best tracer in the league for a long time. I playing against him, I've always felt this guy's the best tracer in the league.
He's not the forget one name I Twilight think coming in on Baptiste as well.
Yeah, and I think that also showed as a major moment of strength. I think Moth is really, really strong player, but I think his best heroes are those AoE healers, full main supports, whereas Bap Zen is despite Bap functionally being your main support in that comp, it really is a double flex support strategy. And, to have two players who that's their main hero, that's their natural strength is flex support, you put both of them in together. We've seen a ton of teams do the same thing, and I think the addition of Twilight to the roster now just makes a ton more sense, right? It's this is why you want him in, for the double flex support strategy. You know, and you know, somebody else. So if the meta shifts and Twilight's more comfortable on the flex support than Violet, they can sub them out and put you know, Moth and Twilight together. It just feels like Shock has the best managed roster in the league to me. They've got the options in the DPS. They've got the options on like every role. They've got options, and they have a lot of good ones. Like there's no player on the team who I'm thinking maybe you shouldn't start that player. Like they don't have any dead weight on the roster, and I think that's a huge asset to them, that they always have the flexibility. Feels like hero pools have barely phased this team, and then they seem yet stronger when they go back to, you know, no hero pools, and then the full flexibility of the roster is unleashed. Like this team is a force to be reckoned with.
All right, so my final question for you before we end today's discussion here is that I feel like we've been on the fence about the Paris Eternal, right? Are they a team that can attain greatness, or are they stuck in the middle? And they always seem to get their wins where they can take them. Sometimes they're over, teams are also in the middle. But every time they have a chance to really prove themselves, whether it's up against the Philly or up against the San Francisco Shock, they end up falling just short. Can we still continue to put this hope into the Paris Eternal that they're able to rise above? Or do you think they're just going to stay relegated to the middle of the pack for the rest of the season?
You know, it's tough, but I still believe, for one, like, regardless of the results, regardless of a tough loss against Shock, I do still think this team can be a top team. You know, I think something that have been holding them back are, well, obviously there's like the, exigent circumstances as far as Eggsy and his injury. I think Eggsy and Sparkle is really like the duo that a lot of people were super hyped about. But I also think Nico's been having a great season, so they have a ton of flexibility in the DPS department. Where I think they've been lacking is, it does feel to me like Benbest is a little bit on Rhine duty, and I think they would be a stronger team if they had better flexibility as far as tank picks go. Even just within one map to be able to change from a Rhine style to an Orisa style to a Winston style. It really does feel like it's like when Benbest is in, they're probably going to play Rhine strats, and when No Smite is in, they're probably not. And that is a little bit much of a tell, I would say, at least in the Overwatch League. Makes it a little bit easier for their opponents to play against them. And on top of that, I mean, they also have the X factor of like losing support players and having to make changes in that line. I think Fielder's been playing well, but it's still like adjustments to the roster, trying to figure things out. FD God looks completely insane, unchecked God player on Lucio, but I don't think his other heroes are at that same par. I think they're good, but not, he doesn't seem like he's carrying on those other heroes. Maybe it's the nature of Lucio that it's like possible to even have that kind of impact, where the other heroes are a little bit more stable and expected, but he doesn't seem like the number one most comfortable BAP player in the league or whatever. So I think if they can work on those elements of flexibility, like moving beyond their strong suit on those heroes, like Benbest on the Rhine and FD God on the Lucio, moving beyond their strongest comfort zone and building new comfort zones, building new heroes up to that same par, then I really think they could easily reach that level. I think they've got the fundamental skill, and if the meta is right, I think they are a top team. Like if you can leave Benbest on Rhine 24/7 and FD God on Lucio 24/7, and that's a good strategy, then they're looking really, really solid. But I do think that position just makes them a little bit more at the mercy of patches and hero pools than some other teams that are at the top. And that, to me, seems like the difference between them and a real top team. Like I think they have the ability, the skill, but they're a little bit too meta-dependent, patch-reliant to be a team like the Shock, who just, it doesn't matter what they're playing. Like they're looking amazing.
All right, guys. Well, that's going to wrap it up for our discussion here today. Make sure you check out our other videos. Last week, we had a chance to sit down with Dream, assistant coach of the Houston Outlaws. And make sure you keep your eyes peeled for another video later this weekend where we break down and talk about the prevalence of the Widowmaker and Tracer meta in the APAC region. Otherwise, visit CheckpointXP for a wealth of other content, video and otherwise. And make sure you're following Jake. That's Jake OW on Twitter and Jake_OW on Twitch and YouTube. Until next time, stay on the payload.